Alex, so welcome back to another video. Today, I'm going on a rampage. I have a whole host of genres that I love. My top 5 being fantasy, sci-fi, historical fiction, romance, and horror. Of the former 4, I have already done videos where I talk through issues that I have with those genres, things I find really vexing that haunt those genres. And today we're going to be talking through the last of the 5. We're talking through horror. This is a genre that I am just getting into, but I'm already super happy to be hyping up and really getting into. But there are certain elements that I keep encountering or keep cropping up occasionally that are irritating enough that I feel the need to vent about them. So that's exactly what we're talking through today. As with the previous videos, I have got 5 things to talk about today. These are things within books that one can be done well. They're not always done badly. And they are not things that I think are a huge problem that are going to make me not want to read the genre. They are just things that I wish cropped up less. The first one is something that I do find problematic and that does make me really uncomfortable about the genre. And while I think it can be handled really well and discussed in a way really highlights issues, it is something that can and has frequently been mishandled, and that is the misuse and misrepresentation of either mental health or disability. Historically, we used both mental health and disability within horror books because the whole idea was, if you don't conform to society, then you are abhorrent. If you do not look the right way, if you do not behave the right way, there is something so wrong with you that you are pushed to the fringes of society. So its origins are already quite murky. Now, I've read a few horror or dark academia books, for example, that deal with paranormal elements and things like that deal with mental health, and I don't think deal with them in a way that they deserve. I've very recently read a book that handled it magnificently, that discussed it, but sometimes mental health is used simply as a plot device, as it was all her imagining, or it was all in her head, or, and it's normally female, let's be honest, or she was schizophrenic the whole time, bipolar disorder, or multiple personality disorder, or any of those issues that then kind of get thrown in as ta-da at the end, which oftentimes either paints someone with mental health issues as completely insane and therefore devoid of any connection to reality, or worse yet, as the villain. And I think that that needs to be handled with so much more care. We are getting better with it. I definitely think that newer iterations of books with mental health representation do handle it a bit better, but even still, I think that it's something that crops up too often in the genre still for my liking. There is no need for it to crop up as often as it does. Another element of horror that I don't like, which again I haven't seen in a lot of modern iterations, thank goodness, but potentially is one of the reasons why I struggled to get into horror younger, is because we tend to have a good versus evil dichotomy. There is this good people that bad things are happening to, and then bad people who are just evil for the sake of evil. And I much prefer the more modern iterations where we're having a certain level of nuance, where you can have someone who isn't necessarily a really good person, who still doesn't deserve to have the horrors happen to them. The horrors happening to you don't need to be a comeuppance. And I think that the layering of those discussions of ordinary people having things happen to them due to circumstance is much more of my preference, especially if we're critiquing things, if we're critiquing the past. For example, my April vlog, because I am filming this in April, I know this has come out substantially later, but my April vlog where I read horror books, I had a conversation about this a little bit. So I had 2 historical books that I think used the horror to discuss history in a really interesting way, and especially what history would have been like for women. And then I also had a contemporary one where you had someone who isn't an angel, who isn't always the nicest, the best person in the world. She's not a saint. She is a human with flaws, but that doesn't mean that she deserves everything that happens to her in the book, and that then the levels of complications that happen within the family were also a key part to the horrors as opposed to a separate part. I think that was done really well, and I really enjoyed it. So I would definitely say it can be a really good vessel for discussing nuance. Previously, an awful lot of it was, if you're a bad person, bad things will happen to you. If you're a good person, good things will happen to you, and you will survive the end of the book. And I don't enjoy those. Another one when it comes to representation that I do struggle with is when we have a misuse of either folklore or religion. So either we're taking religious iconography and religious elements, or folklore and folkloric elements, or a combination thereof to suit the narrative, often to the detriment of that actual culture, folklore, or religion. An example of this, for example, in Pet Sematary, where for some reason this resurrections need to be happening on Native American ground. There is absolutely no need for this to be a thing. It could just be this particular pet cemetery is in an area where this kind of magic happens. There's no need to tether it to a culture, but then it misrepresents that culture. We go into mystifying Native American cultures, for example, and that makes me uncomfortable. So while I do like when we weave folklore in, I do like folk horror, I think that if you're misusing it just so that you can give it an air of mystery, I do not partake in any faith. So this isn't a personal, I don't like it when you misuse my culture. I wouldn't like it if you misused my culture, and therefore I understand that other people also probably don't like it when you misuse their culture. If you're misusing it as opposed to playing on it or leaning into it, especially when you're taking folklore, there are so many dark elements within folklore you can completely lean into. So when people take it and misuse it for no apparent reason, I always am just a little bit confused, because it's like, but of all the folkloric elements you could have chosen, you just decided to misrepresent this one instead of using one that would be actually more applicable, that I'm sure is out there. So that is something that I personally struggle with, is when we're dealing with any part of a previous religious belief or a current one, just to further a narrative to the point where we are disrespecting that heritage, that culture, that religion, that folklore. Again, it can be done magnificently. It can also be done questionably. The next one I'm going to talk about is one that is discussed more in the genre. Normally in these videos, I do try and talk about things, a more personal sense, things that I think have bothered me that I haven't seen talked about quite as much. This is just one that I think, as readers generally of the genre, can really bother us. And that is dumb characters. That is just when you have absolute morons for some reason running the show. Why am I following these idiots? Why are they running in that direction? Why haven't they done this thing? Why are they splitting up? You know, all of the just, why are they not using brain cells? It's not even because I think, well, you know, it's there to further the plot. I get it. I think it's so much scarier when you have a character who's done everything right, done everything they can, and everything still goes wrong. Those to me are much better crafted, because then it's like they couldn't have done anything better and yet they still got. I love those ones. I love it much more when you have an intelligent main character, because then you're like, well, I would be fucked too, instead of just sitting there and critiquing all of the stuff that they did wrong. Now, don't get me wrong, there is definitely wiggle room for things like panic and fear where you're not going to be thinking straight, but there are times where you're just like, there is no way, even in the absolute worst of situations, you would be this dumb. Absolutely no way. It makes the book less engaging and less entertaining because it makes it frustrating instead. I just think that the levels of intelligence that you give your characters means that then the fear amps up, because an intelligent person who is doing everything they can and everything right and everything's still going badly for them, that is scarier than someone who is like, well, yeah, you got caught because you ran into the house instead of away from it. All of those things. So I think not only because it's frustrating to just read dumb characters, but also because I do think that it lessens the fear, because we as readers go, well, I wouldn't have done that, so therefore I'm not afraid anymore, and that's not helpful. And then the last one that I'm going to chat about today is unearned neat endings. So sometimes you'll have a nice neat ending where it's like, you know, we did the exorcism and the demon is gone, for example. Now everything can kind of stabilize again. That's fine, you know, or we caught the slasher, you know, everything will be fine. But every now and then there's one where it's just like, okay, that lined up way too neatly. You had all of this mess going throughout the whole book, and then that lined up way too neatly at the end. Horror is one of the few genres that I'm okay with an open ending. Not completely open ending, of course, not just like cut halfway through a scene, see you later, but at the very least to have an ending that, you know, you don't know if it's resolved. or you don't know if it's still out there. Those are fine. I enjoy those because then that adds to the creepiness. But ones that end nice and neat and just everything's been going to hell and then boom, end of story. Now don't get me wrong, with slashers, arguably, you kill the slasher, problem solved. So there are some subgenres where it can totally work, but some of them, I just don't feel like they earned it, or that it's explained away in a way that just is really unsatisfying just to neaten up the ending, just so that it comes in nice and tidy. Those are the ones that I end up struggling with more, because I want it to either not be resolved and then we've got that creepy element, or to be resolved in a way that is deserving, that it makes sense. It's like, yes, this is how we got here, that we worked through it and we got there in the end. But there are some where it's just like action, 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 and neat ending. And it's like, whoa, okay, where did that come from? With horror, I am very pernickety about endings. It needs to earn its ending. More than probably any other genre I can think of, it needs to earn its ending. But there you have it. Those are 5 things that bother me about the horror genre. 5 things that, if they come up, they potentially will end up losing the book a star, depending on which element it is. Let me know what things bother you within the horror genre. Again, I'm quite new to it, so there might be a load of tropes and trappings of the genre that I have just not picked up on yet. But from what I've read so far, those are the things that tend to stand out to me. And they are things that I've actually noticed because recently I've been reading newer releases in the horror genre and I've been really enjoying them. I've noticed the things of horror that I read in the past that I didn't like because of how much I like how they're represented in the newer books. So it seems like the horror genre really is on a good trajectory and I'm really excited to keep going with it. So at the minute, not one I have huge amount of complaints about, but again, I'm still very new to it. So let me know what are things that bother you and that irk you. Let me know also of books that you think have a really good handling of these things. So books that handle folklore really well, or that handle mental health really well, or that have a really earned ending, that they really deserve the ending that they got. All of those. Let me know what are some good examples of these things in the comments down below. But that is all for me for today. So thank you ever so much for watching, and I will hopefully catch you in another one soon. Bye.